Okay, so moving on past the schedule talk. So this week we had the interview between Carmelo Anthony and Stephen A. Smith on First Take. Um, I know I have listened to it. Have you given it a listen yourself?
Yeah, so I got to listen to most of the highlights, read through some of the articles around it and some of the quotes and stuff. So I did think it was interesting to hear Carmelo's perspective on what happened, especially with how the news was broke to him.
Yeah, at this point though, I mean, it just feels sad for Carmelo. I think the league's basically forcing him into retirement. Um, do you think that Carmelo has anything left to add to the game?
So here's the thing, right? So Carmelo got to be a 10-time All-Star, Olympic champ by playing a certain way, right? He did a lot of his ISO ball, was sort of the go-to guy, would put up, sometimes 62 points a game, I think was his high or something like that. I don't think his style works anymore. So if he's willing to adapt, I think there are some things that he can add. He's a little bit slower defensively now, right? So he's definitely a liability when it comes, close to the basket, right? So within 6 feet and 10 feet, he was giving up a whole lot of shots and opportunities. But I do think as a spot up shooter, so I want to say it was something like 90.5% of his 3 points that were assisted, he made them. He just didn't take that many of them, right? Which I don't know if it was necessarily a system thing or the rotations or what it was. So his 3-point percentage was actually below league average, but it was because he was so bad at taking his own 3-point shots. Whereas, like I said, when he's assisted, he's actually not bad. So maybe there's a role for him. It would depend on the team, though.
Yeah, it just really interesting when you read some of these like quotes from the interview. I felt fired. Daryl Morey telling him, "We no longer need your services." Him having to justify never saying he was on a farewell tour. I know I can still play. It just kind of sounds desperate. And I think, honestly, it sounds cruel, but I think the NBA is doing him more of a service at this point by not signing him to a team and letting him walk, because the longer this goes, because one of the main quotes from there is going to be, "You're telling me there's 30 teams in the NBA and I can't make a 15-man roster." Now, what does that mean? Does that mean we're going to see him with the Charlotte Hornets on a kind of like we saw Tony Parker last year, or some other random obscure squad? Is he going to be Vince Carter for the next 10 years, just kind of like hanging around rosters, continuously bringing down his per game averages? I mean, at this point, too, you look at his per 36 minutes every year since 2012, it's been consistently going down, except one little blip in the radar in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
2012, 2013, 27.8, 2013, 2014, 25.5, 2014, 2015, 24.4, 2015, 2016, 22.4. Went up, and like I said, in 2016, 23.5. And then obviously the last 2 years, 18.2 in OKC. And then in the 10 games he played for Houston, 16.4. In the 10-game stretch he played for Houston, it ended on a sour note. His last game versus Oklahoma City, which, could have been a premier matchup, a revenge game, 20 minutes, 1 for 11, 0 for 6 from 3, 2 points.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's sort of sad to see where his career has gone, right? Because a lot of people remember him, right, as the Hoodie Mellow, the guy that was awesome in Denver, even in New York, right? He was still a pretty big thing, the Olympics, all of that. But I think you're right. I think if anything, he may be able to sign a vet minimum. He said he was willing to come off the bench. But then the problem that you have, right, is most of the top contenders right now, I think, have basically filled up their roster. I would like to see him maybe go to Denver, right? Sign a vet minimum, go to Denver, and finish out, do sort of farewell tour where it sort of all started.
But does he fit like how they play?
That's the thing. I don't think so. Maybe coming off like with the second unit, because sometimes I've heard that coaches like to have a slightly different style of play, right? Just so you could keep defenses on their toes and make sort of adjustments. But at the same time, like I think a cohesive system is important, right? So I could see the argument against that. And honestly, there's been talk about his locker room presence too, right? Like he's a 10-time All-Star, so he sometimes acts like it. At least what we've heard in the past, right? So he seemed very sincere now, right? I'm sure he would do his best. We've seen guys change, right? DeMarcus Cousins, I've heard, has been fantastic since he was injured, right? I think he understands that, hey, I've got to do what I've got to do to prove myself, right? So I've heard his behaviors changed from when he was with Sacramento. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I don't know if we'll see Melo on a team though this year.
Yeah, and I think it's even more telling too that he's not even getting invited to play with USA Basketball right now. A 3-time gold medalist, and Jerry Colangelo, the head of USA Basketball, just wants to stay away from him. Here's literally the quote that Colangelo gave in an interview this week. I understand, and this is reference to the interview he did with First Take. I understand why the agent, he's looking to get him the exposure, looking to get him another shot. But the only way Carmelo can really be satisfied is for him to have another shot in the NBA with another team. And recently he's been aggressive media-wise, letting people know, I feel like I can still play. I just need an opportunity, blah, blah, blah. With us, that would have been more of a distraction, as we discussed. We need to focus on the team concept. We're having a bunch of new guys, and we're going to go with the new group. And when you insert a different element and it distracts in any way, you lose it. That was it. That's no reflection on Carmelo. I love the guy, but I don't think it would have been healthy for our program at the time. See, that's the most telling quote I think I've heard in this closure to Carmelo's chapter. And I think it's a very somber note to end a career on.
Yeah. And it's a very strong statement too, right? It's not like we considered Carmelo, but we didn't think he was right at the time, where it's kind of wishy-washy. It was very direct in that, nope, we're going a different direction, and Carmelo is not a part of that direction we want to go in and that strategy we want to execute.
And, too, it's even more disappointing when you consider that this is probably the weakest USA basketball roster that U.S. has had in at least a decade and a half.
By far.
Yeah.
I mean, like, trust me, I love Kyle Kuzma. I think he's a great player, but on previous USA teams, there's no way he would have made that top 15, right? When you have guys like Anthony Davis was playing right out of college. You had LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, all these superstars. But now our USA squad, most of our superstars have said, no, we're going to focus on, and I think part of it is because the NBA is so open this year, we're just going to focus on being with our team, getting ready for the actual season. So
yeah, and it does make sense when you read into Colangelo's comments in reference to it as a young team and they don't need the added element in it. Obviously, you have like players like, honestly, most of the Celtics roster right now is on the team. Clearly, we learned what a bad locker room presence can do to that squad. So maybe they just don't really need it on the USA roster right now.
Yeah, and I also wonder if, because it's such a young squad now, if they're turning their head towards, hey, we just want to develop players. And just from a basketball standpoint, Carmelo Anthony and the style of play that he played doesn't really meld with that strategy like they were saying, right? So if you're looking hey, we just want to develop USA basketball for the future, especially like this will still be a good squad. I still expect us to be one of, if not the most competitive country, right, in the world. But now it's, hey, how do we develop these future stars, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of good squads out there in this year. The U.S. is still going to be the favorite, but the bar, it's a lot closer than it used to be, and like you just don't need any liabilities on the court, whether it be a locker room wise or whether it be if you really do think that Carmelo is a player in full on decline.
Yeah. And like I said, like even further from a development standpoint, do you really want to take minutes away from a potential future, all-star to give it to an aging, declining, previous all-star that you've had that may not necessarily be very good anymore?
Absolutely.